You are listening to the Main Street Vegan Podcast. And I'd like in my little intro today to talk a bit about why that is such a cool thing that you're doing. First, thank you. Thank you as we progress into our, golly, 14th year. We're at something like podcast number 553. And when we started, the vegan podcast world was teeny tiny. I knew when we started in 2012 about Bob Linden's Go Vegan podcast. I knew about Our Hen House and about Joyful Vegan with Colleen Patrick Goudreau. And I'm sure there were a few others out there that I was unaware of, but it was pretty much pioneer territory back in 2012. And now the vegan podcast landscape is full of amazing and wonderful conversations. There's so much to choose from, there's so much to zero in on, and it means a lot when you choose this one. It means a lot to me anyway. And I'll tell you one of the many reasons why I think you've made a good choice. I've been around this movement, this world, since 1970, and I actually met today's guest that year. So, on the Main Street Vegan podcast, you will often hear from people who have been at this for a long time. Maybe I should change the name to the OG podcast. But either way, the cool thing is that we're still at it, still making progress every day. Thanks for making that progress with us. Hi, everybody. I am Victoria Moran, and what a pleasure to welcome you today. I'm here. I'll also introduce, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, this is James. This is James, and we adopted in November. He's very sweet and perfect. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can just trust that he's a little Chihuahua mix and came from Tennessee. I know really nothing else about him. I was at a screening a couple of days ago of a documentary called Dogspiracy, and we'll actually be talking to some people from that film later this summer. But just watching this film about puppy mills and some of the things that these creatures go through that we love so much, and thinking of how many of us are out there working for animals like cows and pigs and chickens that many people have never met or never gotten close to, just makes me know that we have a lot of work to do. And how wonderful that there are people doing the work, doing it for a long time, and doing it magnificently. And someone like that is with me today, and he is Nathaniel Altman. Nathaniel Altman is one of my longest friends. Don't want to say oldest friends, but longtime friends. We met when we both were young semi-volunteer workers at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America outside Chicago. Nathaniel is a Brooklyn-based writer. He has authored more than 20 books on diet, alternative healing, metaphysics, and relationships. Those books include Eating for Life, 1973, first book on vegetarianism to be published in the United States in the 20th century. He just beat Francis Moore Lapay. He's also the author of Ahimsa, Dynamic Compassion, Total Vegetarian Cooking, Love Light, Medical Palmistry, Everybody's Guide to Chiropractic Healthcare. And now we're going to be talking about his brand new book, The Genealogy of Plant Foods. So, Nathaniel, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Victoria. Great to see you.
It's wonderful to see you too. Now, I am told that Zoom protects us from dog barking. Do you hear my dog barking?
No,
You don't. Okay, well then I'm going to trust that the listeners don't either. James, calm down because mommy can't hear you. All right, let's get going on this wonderful conversation. So, this is a unique book in the vegetarian vegan space because we all know that we're supposed to be eating plants and we're supposed to be eating whole plants, but we don't often think about the plants themselves. And in this book, The Genealogy of Plant Foods, the spiritual, nutritional, and medicinal power of the foods that sustain us, you get into the character of these plants as well as their nutritional properties and so forth. So, what inspired you to write a book like this?
Well, I've been interested in genealogy about my own family. And after COVID, I was just thinking about what about doing a little bit of study about plants? And I was very surprised that there's a lot of information about the origin of plants, the chemicals they contain, and their health benefits that were not known maybe uh, 50 years ago. There have been a lot of peer reviewed studies that have been published in medical, anthropological, scientific journals that are very obscure. And I was very surprised to find that there's so much information about plants. So I just started exploring them and I said, oh, maybe just put a book together. And it was one of the most exciting and enjoyable books I've ever written because there's so much that I discovered for the first time. And, I'd find out, for example, that uh, blackberries and black raspberries, cranberries, strawberries, blueberries, corn, and squash are indigenous to the United States. But quite a few of the foods that we eat are like our immigrant ancestors who came from Europe and Asia and Latin America and are now part of our daily diets.
I was reading this morning in your book about okra. So I have an interest in okra these days because it is one of those foods that's high in soluble fiber, that lowers LDL cholesterol. I never much liked it, frankly. But now that I know something of its heritage, you want to talk a little bit about okra just to pull one out of the book?
It's interesting. I have the same feeling that you do about okra. I've never really liked it. It's probably my least favorite vegetable, but if it's cooked in the right way, it's really quite crispy and it's delicious. Years ago, I read Hands. As you know, I've written books on palmistry, and I was reading Hands at an Indian restaurant, and the chef always gave me dinner, and he prepared okra and I really liked it. It isn't still one of my favorite vegetables, but it's originally from India, and it's become very popular, of course, in India and Asia. And recently, it's come to the United States. A lot of these foods came with immigrant groups, and were either brought in the form of seeds when people immigrated, or they've been here for many, many more years by traders. So it's kind of an interesting food, and it's very popular in India. If it's cooked correctly, I think it's pretty good, and I've taken to like it more than I used to.
Sometimes when I find out that a food is really, really good for you, I figure out how to like it more. And I've told this story before. Do you happen to recall a classic movie? I'm going to ask you to go back to childhood now. The movie was called Bell, Book, and Candle, 1958, Kim Novak. Ringing any bells?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, it was about contemporary witches, well, contemporary to that time. And at one point, Kim Novak bought her aunt, Hermione Gingold, this lovely scarf. And Hermione, who a great witch, said, "But what does it do?" And Kim Novak said, "It makes you look ravishing." And
Mm.
Hermione was like, huh, wasn't enough. And I feel that about food. I don't want it just to look good, taste good. I want it to do something for me. So with okra, knowing that it's lowering my LDL and doing all this good stuff, I can get a little bit cozier, to the consistency. So these foods have such interesting stories. Tell me your favorite. What story surprised you the most?
Well, my favorite, and it's one of my favorite foods, I would say tomatoes. I really like tomatoes. They're originally from the west coast of South America, particularly in Chile, Peru, and Ecuador. And they were very small in the beginning. They were like little cherry tomatoes are today. They were eaten by birds who migrated north. The seeds couldn't be digested, so were defecated as they flew north, and of course, plants grew from that. And finally, when they arrived in Mexico, the people who were very advanced culturally, about 8,000 years ago, started to cultivate tomatoes. And there was a resistance to eating them in Europe and the United States because they're part of the nightshade family, which is also shared by potatoes and eggplant and other chili peppers as well. And they were popular finally in Italy in 1548, arrived in Mexico, where they were cultivated 8,000 years ago, as we know. But they started to become very popular in the US in the mid 1800s. Today, there are over 10,000 varieties of tomato, and they're very closely identified with Italy, but they're very popular here as well. Many, many kinds of varieties. And the same happened with chili peppers. They're from the Amazon basin. They were spread by birds who migrated north and cultivated in Mexico 8,000 years ago. And now they've become imported to Africa and Asia. And they're very popular in China, India, and Thailand. So these foods to me were the most interesting, but all of them have an interesting history and they're all very different. Some were brought by in the slave trade, some were introduced by Christopher Columbus, others were by normal traders during many years, and other people like Benjamin Franklin and Washington and Jefferson introduced some of the foods here to the United States.
I've often wondered, Nathaniel, about the great preponderance, the great number of plant foods that are available to us in this country, North America, Western Europe, some other prosperous places on the planet. And yet there are other parts of the world where I've traveled, and I know you've traveled, and people's diets are much narrower and they don't have access to all of this variety. So we're always told for health to eat a wide variety of foods, and yet we know that Americans don't tend to be all that healthy. What's going on?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with how we prepare foods. As you know, we eat a lot of heavily processed foods with a lot of added salt, a lot of added sugar. The foods are very far from their natural state. And most of the food that we eat happens to be very heavily processed. And as you know, there's a lot of meat eating, a lot of eating potato chips. Potatoes are a very healthy food, especially uh, potatoes that have color to them, like yams, and potatoes that are purple, potatoes that are orange. But most of the potatoes we eat are white potatoes, which have can spike our sugar. Or, but the problem is that these foods are heavily processed, like French fries, potato chips. That's how most potatoes are eaten.
Hmm.
Uh, I love I love French fries, but I don't eat them very often because they're just not good for you. But I like baked potatoes. I use potatoes in soup that I make and in stir fry dishes. And they're very good and healthy. And I try to use potatoes that are colored. So I think a lot has to do with the choices we make with the variety of foods that we have. And we really don't take advantage of that. A lot of people focus on a couple of foods that they like, and they don't explore other foods. Like very few people have eaten okra, very few people have eaten Brussels sprouts. Uh, they're just not very popular, but they're very good for you. And I think people could experiment more. And what I like about the study that I made with these foods is I've become a lot more appreciative of food. I've been experimenting more with food, experimenting more with spices, and it's made my life a lot more pleasant and enjoyable and a lot of new discoveries. And I think that Americans should try to do this a little bit more. I know you've done this in your own life a lot. You're a great cook and you've explored all kinds of foods, but most people haven't. And I think we could try to do more in that area.
Well, it's really fun. And I recall with the spices that you mentioned, let's see, I was living in this apartment, so it was sometime since 2000. 13 or so, I was doing this podcast and speaking with a food person and a dietitian. We were doing a kind of three-way. And I was just like, but what do you do with all these spices? And they were trying to educate me. And then Dr. Greger's How Not to Age came out, and I started using more spices. And now I go through them like crazy. I buy them in bulk. When before it was kind of, a little bit of basil, a little bit of thyme, and that was it. So we really can learn and grow even when we've been cooking for a long time. So we talk a lot about nutritional things, about health on this program. So I want to do that somewhat with you, but then I also want to move on from there to some of these areas where you really have super expertise in terms of some of the spiritual components of health, nutrition,
Mhm.
ahimsa, and the rest. But staying in the health world for a bit, tell us what phytochemicals are for people who don't know.
Okay, phytochemicals are basically just chemicals produced by plants. They include what are called flavonoids, alkaloids, phenols, carotenoids, phytosterols, antioxidants. There are hundreds of them. And recent science has discovered that many of them can prevent and cure degenerative diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Several can help prevent dementia and Alzheimer's. And they're even developing medicines based on these plant chemicals.
Mm.
So they're used, and this is found to be very effective with minimal side effects. So when you eat plant foods, and I only included 106 in my book. Of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of foods that I that have that are based by in plant-based foods. But by eating the plants, we benefit from that. It's almost like we take a little bit of medicine with all the plants that we eat. So it's a very phytochemicals are essential, and they keep on discovering more and more of them because one leads to another, and then they're refining their ways of investigating them. So all of the plants contain good chemicals that are healthy for us.
Now, that would be an interesting challenge to, within the next year, eat or at least try all 106 plant foods in Nathaniel Altman's latest book. And you've got all of them. You've got fruits, vegetables, beans, grains, nuts, and seeds. So it's the range. So there are three foods in particular that in your research show a high degree of likelihood of cancer prevention. What are they?
Well, there are actually many of them, but one of the major ones are called cruciferous vegetables, which include broccoli, cabbage, kale, cauliflower, bok choy, and that's those all have anti-cancer chemicals. Green leafy vegetables also have a lot, like spinach and that kind of food. Cabbage is a big thing that is often overlooked, but it's inexpensive and very tasty, very versatile vegetable, and good for you. The other group are the pulses that would include beans, lentils, soybeans, and soy products. These have all been shown in laboratories and in even clinical trials to help lower the cancer risk. Mushrooms is another thing that people often overlook. Fresh mushrooms are very good for preventing cancer and other things as well. Green tea and tea in general is another. And also chili peppers. They found that at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio, which is one of the leading heart hospitals in the world, they find that eating chili peppers in the form of spices or in different foods reduces cancer risk by 28% and heart disease by about 26%. And they say that it also encourages longevity in general. And this was done right here in the US. Most of the studies have been done in Europe and Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. But here they're starting to do more research, and that's great.
Oh, that's really exciting. Plus, I really like chili. Some of the things that I see with all of this is that the same foods seem to show up over and over again. So you can't really go wrong with fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. So when we look at Alzheimer's, same foods that prevent cancer, or are there some other ones?
There are other ones, but I was very surprised that walnuts is considered one of the best foods to help prevent and manage Alzheimer's and dementia. And it's a very ancient food that is indigenous to China. It goes back millions of years. It's part of Chinese traditional medicine. And what's interesting is when you open a walnut, it looks like a brain. So it's always been related to being a brain food. But recent science has discovered that there are chemicals in walnuts that help prevent Alzheimer's and help manage it. Also, they found this is true with almonds, cashews, hazelnuts, and pistachios. And this is a very painless and enjoyable way to help assure good mental health and neurological health by eating maybe a handful of raw, unsalted, uncooked nuts during the day. The problem with nuts, of course, is they're so delicious. We tend to eat too many, and it could make us gain weight. But having a small amount every day as part of our daily diet is enjoyable and and it's been scientifically proven that it helps prevent Alzheimer's disease.
That is really exciting. I'm having a much better opinion of nuts lately. I have been looking into the portfolio diet. Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. David Jenkins from Toronto came up with this. He was on the show some years ago. If you guys want to do some research in the archives and find the show with Dr. Jenkins, but the elements of the portfolio diet for lowering LDL cholesterol are plant sterols, the soluble fiber that we were talking about with okra, which is also barley and oatmeal and all kinds of other plant foods, plant protein, soy and other legumes, and nuts. And in terms of the weight gain, I was actually reading that there's something in nuts that inhibits some of those fat calories from being absorbed. So, maybe even a slightly bigger handful than we were thinking could be appropriate. So that's very, very cool. So while we're on a roll here with all these foods doing amazing things to prevent all kinds of stuff we don't want, give us a couple for blood pressure.
Blood pressure, avocados is one of them,
Hmm.
and also barley, buckwheat, and oats are grains that are very, very good, and also beets is considered a superfood. In Russia and Ukraine, borscht is a basic staple food there, and may try to use them a bit more. Green leafy vegetables, chard, kale, spinach, cabbage, as well as celery, which has become one of my most recent favorite foods. And I've been eating it raw. And also, I made a really good soup the other day with about half a half a celery plant. And it's very good when it's cooked, and it's good to eat raw, and very good in dips. So if you have celery with hummus made with garbanzo beans, you
Ooh.
have a very nice combination of a good snack food, but also very healthy for you.
I
Because
never thought about celery in hummus. I mean, I know it's kind of a staple in those things that would be a sort of veg version of tuna salad and egg
mhm.
salad and that kind of thing. But yeah, in hummus, very cool. Now, throughout history, there have been foods that have been purported to be aphrodisiacs. Any truth in any of that?
Well, it seems that one of the foods that stimulate sex drives are onions, leeks, and chives. Uh, they're in, they originated in China, and they've been part of Chinese traditional medicine. And they believe that it does increase sex drive. And also, Buddhist monks are prohibited from eating them. I honestly don't know if garlic and chives and leeks do increase sex drive or not. I really don't know. In Mexico, they believe chili peppers are very important for increasing sex drive. But I think the point to make is that when a person is vegetarian, the food is lighter, they don't feel heavy, they don't feel sluggish. And I think vegetarians generally have more energy. And that would be not only energy like to run a mile or take a long walk or do hard work, but it may have to do also with sex. But I'd like to see maybe more studies done uh, in that area. Could be interesting.
Yeah, well, that is so interesting. You mentioned the Buddhist monks, and certainly in yoga, onions and garlic are considered rajasic foods, the highly stimulating, and they're discouraged. And so when I was working on my last book, Age Like a Yogi, most of the teachings from yoga and what we know now from lifestyle medicine were very much in keeping. But onions are great in terms of cancer prevention and many other wonderful qualities that we know from modern science. Yogis are not having any of it. And now it makes perfect sense. So maybe it is if you just want to be healthy, have a nice romantic life, have the onions. If you want to be a monk, don't have the onions. Different strokes for different folks, as they say.
Exactly.
So, now that you have done all of this research, tell me the degree of respect that you have for the plant kingdom. And now I'm getting a little bit
Mm.
more into the spiritual. What are plants in the whole scheme of life on earth? We've got trees. You've written a book, Sacred Trees. And then we have these amazing plants, the fruits that come from the trees, the plants that grow up out of the ground. What's going on with all this life?
Well, it's for me. It's been very humbling because when I first got involved in writing the book on sacred trees, of course, we always take trees for granted. We take food for granted, uh, and I was one of these people too. And when I was writing the Sacred Tree book, of course, I realized that trees produce oxygen and they also help process carbon dioxide. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. They take the carbon dioxide that we get rid of and they produce oxygen that makes us be able to breathe and survive. And I can't think of a more intimate relationship between plants and humans with the exchange of oxygen and CO2. So that kind of set the groundwork. And of course, all of the plants we eat become part of our bodies and they give us energy. They allow us to heal. They allow us to develop. So it's a very important relationship. The problem, I think, with humans is we take plants for granted. And one of the messages I think nature gives us is we need to have acknowledgement, respect, and gratitude. I think those three things are really essential for humans. It will help us appreciate the foods that we eat. We will protect the environment and we will be proper stewards of the environment that will ensure our long term survival. When we treat, even with food, we just don't respect it. We throw out over 40% of the food that is produced. And of course, a lot of the plant foods, as like 80% of oats are fed to animals. Uh, that's true with corn, it's true with oats. And this is, I think, very wasteful. And it also makes food more expensive for people to buy. And right now, what's happening is that food is becoming very, very expensive. And we need to be very careful how we buy food and to save money. And I think a lot of people are sacrificing their nutrition and health because of not being able to afford food. But there are certain foods that are very good to eat that are inexpensive, like beans, uh, grains. Uh, Foods like that should be more of our basic foods, and they are cheaper. And by using our imaginations and creativity, we could really enjoy the foods. It's not like just eating a bunch of beans and rice, but by using uh, judiciously using vegetables and also, as you mentioned, different kinds of spices, it could help a great deal.
Mm. So, as we talk about all this big picture stuff around what we eat, around even breathing, and how the trees have so much to do with that. We get up in the morning, we don't think much about our breathing, but maybe we do. Maybe we get up and we're doing pranayama. But how many of us are thinking about the trees and the connection there? I mean, I know I have a lot of plants around the house, and I remember reading somewhere that the mother-in-law's tongue does the carbon dioxide thing backwards. Other plants, do that during the day, and the mother-in-law's tongue does it at night. So I make sure, in the bedroom we got some of that. But life gets so busy, it's sometimes hard to pause and remember the wonder. So I want to move a little bit, Nathaniel, into the other side of Nathaniel Altman. You've done so much about food and healing, but you also get kind of below the surface in some of the other aspects of your research. So I mentioned earlier that you and I met when we were both young workers at the Theosophical Society in America, and a lot of people have never heard of theosophy. So tell folks what that is.
Well, it's Theosophy means divine wisdom, and the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 by Madame Blavatsky, William Q. Judge, Henry S. Alcott, and other people. And it's a worldwide organization that does not have a specific dogma, but talks about the unity of life, the exploration of yoga, metaphysics, and aspects of life that are more subtle. And I've been involved with them, as you know, since you were back in 1970, and I've felt very comfortable with it because there's no people belong to it from many different religions, and all religions are respected. And the idea is that there is a unity of religions, and also that all life is interconnected and interrelated. And it's a very basic thing, and it's a scientific fact. But we don't really see it as that. We see life in many uh, kind of separative, you're different than I am. Trees are different from us. We have nothing to do with plants. We have nothing to do with rocks. But in reality, we do, because of course we're made up of minerals as well as uh, cells, living cells that are related to plants and other animals. So the idea, I think, behind theosophy is that it's one life and that we all are connected and we need to respect each other and help each other, protect the environment, be kind to animals, be kind to plants. And from my research, I find that plants are okay with us eating them, and trees are okay with even being cut, but they they at least ask us to respect them and acknowledge their sacrifice. And of
Mm.
course, before eating, many people in many countries, for example, in Japan, they say a prayer before eating every meal. Thank you for this food. And that would include not only the foods that we're eating, but even the people who help pick them and process them and bring them to the grocery store and pack them for us, and
Oh,
even those who purchase them. So I think we need to have a deeper level of consciousness into that idea of the one life, the interconnectedness of living things.
mm. There is one theosophist that you knew well. I met once, and you've done a lot of work keeping his writings, teachings alive. And you've done something recently on his work around animals. But tell us about Geoffrey Hodson, who he was, what he saw, and what we can learn from him today.
Well, he was a really a fascinating person, and I was able to. He was, in addition to you, who I'll acknowledge, helped me with my book, Eating for Life. That was very important. And Geoffrey Hodson was kind enough to write the foreword to it. And he was a vice president of the International Vegetarian Union. And that kind of made the book a little more legitimate in the eyes of many people, I think. And he later became my mentor when I lived and worked at the Crotona Institute of Theosophy in Ojai, California. And we used to have meetings together and we'd talk about different things. He was a clairvoyant and he was able to see uh, auras around people. He was very involved in healing people by looking at them clairvoyantly. He was also very connected to nature, particularly the energies around trees. Now, many of our relatives, our ancestors going back hundreds of years, were very connected to the plant kingdom. You know, trees they believed had a spirit and a guiding spirit. Many of them communicated with trees, they blessed trees, they had sacred trees. And Geoffrey Hodson was able to see this. So he wrote several books about our relationship with the angelic kingdom, which had to do with not only angels in heaven, but also the angels that are connected to plants. Very often, when we go into a garden, we see a lot of beauty, but we also feel inspired. And he believed that that inspiration came from the energies that the plants emitted, and they connected to us. So he was very involved in that, and he lived almost 100 years, was active until he was about 95, and he passed away when he was 96. And he wrote on many, many subjects. He wrote about yoga, he wrote about Christianity, Buddhism, and he strongly believed in animal rights. And he felt that cruelty is one of the worst things for human evolution. And he always reminded people, you know, just be kind to others, including animals, be kind to plants, embrace beauty as part of your life. So to me, he was a real Renaissance man, and he had a very strong impact on me. I didn't appreciate it at the time I knew him because he was kind of modest and didn't like to show off. But I remember the basic things that I believe in were inspired by him. So I'm very grateful to him, and I'm happy to have a little publishing business and have been publishing his books that have been out of print. And it's been very enjoyable for me, and people have been enjoying them too. I'm happy
And
for that.
can you name a couple of those books that particularly Main Street Vegan podcast listeners would appreciate?
Well, he wrote a really good book called The Brotherhood of Angels and of Men, which is probably his most famous angel book. He wrote a book called Kingdom of the Gods. And he's also written books on health and healing, uh, which are some of them are now in print again. He wrote about the miracle of birth. He wrote about life after death. So he wrote about 45 books, and some of them are still in print. So if you look up Geoffrey Hodson online, there are a lot of books that are available of his still today. He passed away in 1986.
Yeah. It's so funny. I feel like having written 14 books so far, that's a lot. And you've written over 20, and now you're talking about somebody with 46. So really got some keeping up to do. You know, Nathaniel, because you've been around these teachings for so long, you study science, you study comparative religions, philosophy, and you speak about someone being a clairvoyant. You speak about angels as if you were talking about, we're going to go to Starbucks and get a coffee. Like it's just an ordinary thing. But to a lot of people listening, it sounds very woo woo and very alien. So let's just back up and get a little bit more elementary on some of this stuff. So, Geoffrey Hodson, when you say he was clairvoyant, what does that mean? And how did he realize that he had this gift?
Well, apparently he started having visions when he was very young, and he was able to sense energies and see energies around him. Many children talk about imaginary beings that they see, and a lot of us have those experiences as children. You know, we have a favorite tree that we like to go to, or there's a part of the garden we particularly like. And when we and people say, "Oh, this is stupid," you know, you grow out of it. There's no such thing. And then we kind of cut off that innate sensitivity that we have. Uh, Animals, particularly dogs, uh, also are very sensitive to their environment. Geoffrey Hodson had a pet dog who was able to sense the presence of angels and fairies. And the dog would bark, and then Geoffrey would look and he'd see kind of a cloud or an energy. But he had a very big awakening once in England where he saw a very large angel, and he was really quite overwhelmed, and the angel was able to communicate with him. I've never been to that point in my evolution, but I do feel the energies of trees, the energies of flowers, the energies in certain places, like at a waterfall. When I go to Niagara Falls, which people say, oh, it's a touristy, a lot of tourists. For me, it's a power spot in the world. And waterfalls have huge amount of energy. And people feel it. You go to even Niagara Falls, you go to people to the place, and people are excited, they're happy, they're laughing. Some of them are profoundly moved by the spiritual feeling of it. So I think that people at a very basic level, we're wired to this, but we cut off our feelings about it. We're told it's stupid, it's weird, don't get into it too deeply. But it's been part of all religious inspiration. Many of the religions of the world, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, they all talk about angels, they all talk about religious inspiration. And I think it's good that we understand that and find our own particular path. I
Mm.
think the beauty of theosophy, as we talked about before, is they encourage you to follow your own particular path. So whether you follow Muslim tradition or Jewish tradition, doesn't matter. Just become a better person and to be connected to the world. If that helps you, that's okay. I like what Abraham Lincoln used to say when they asked him about religion. He said, I don't really care what your religion is as long as your dog is better for it.
Yes.
Which is, if you're kind to others, particularly to animals, that's part of religion. It's a kindness is stressed in all of the religions. The hard thing is to do it. It's easy to talk about it. It's easy to write about it. The hard part is to do it, but we have to do it.
Yes. Yes. You remind me in a conversation like this, you take me back to those kind of magical childhood times when you talk about the so-called imaginary friends. I had three, Phoebe, Marcella, and Johnny. And I remember the day that Marcella came to me. I was about 5, and she said, we're not going to come anymore. We've been watching you, and you're going to be okay. And I just said, all right. And that was the last time for her. And then I also remember around the same time, 5, 6, 7, I'm not sure, but I woke up in the night. It was not a dream. I was very definitely awake, even sitting up in bed, awake, and saw an angel. I remember very little of what was told to me, but years later, when I was studying theosophy, when we were there at the headquarters together, and I saw the books of Geoffrey Hodson, he actually described what he saw clairvoyantly to an artist. So there are beautiful color plates in many of his books so that we can get an idea of what he saw. And what I had seen as a child is very much in keeping with these art renderings that were made of what Geoffrey Hodson saw. And you get that kind of, I guess we can't say proof because that's a scientific term, but you get those kinds of ahas and serendipities and connections. And you just have to know that there is more to heaven and earth, Horatio, etc.
And I think that many people, if they go back to their childhood, they do have memories uh, that are similar, or just a certain type of sensitivity to the natural world. And I think we need to get back to that too. And society tells us what we should do, what we shouldn't do, but we need to go to beyond these limitations because they're really interesting. And I was very surprised. I didn't really seek uh, having an interest in trees. It just kind of happened. And we need to be open to that. And I like the idea of going into nature more and going to places that we like. If we like the beach, if we like the rivers, if we like waterfalls, we should go to them more and spend time there. You talked about how people are our life has become so fast and complicated. We need to take a natural break and try to program that into our daily lives as much as possible. Very,
Beautiful.
very important.
And one place to start is by eating more beautiful, fresh, colorful plants, reading the genealogy of plant foods, and going from there. I do want to do a shout out to our sponsor, and then I want to finish up with you, Nathaniel, with an entirely different conversation. I want to talk a little bit about your life as an author. So, we do have a sponsor, and that is Complement. Lovecomplement.com is the website. These are dietary enhancements, dietary supplements made by vegans for vegans. They started with Complement Essential, a wonderful multivitamin that fills in with the vitamin B12, the vitamin D, the zinc, some of the things that we might come up short on, even in the very best diet. We certainly know that vegans and vegetarians and anybody over 50 needs the B12. They have other wonderful products too. A brand new one is called Sulfura, and that is the sulforaphane, the wonderful active ingredient when Nathaniel was talking about the cabbage family vegetables and the broccoli. It's in there, and if you're not quite eating enough of that stuff every day, then you might want to look into Sulfura from Complement. So do check them out, lovecomplement.com, and that's complement, P-L-E, and you can get a 10% discount, not just on your first order, but forever and ever, because I am grandmothered in, if you put in the discount box Main Street in all capital letters. Now, Nathaniel, great thinker, wonderful nature person, palmistry expert, so many things that you do in life. Professionally, it's all centered around writing books. And in the time that you and I have been in publishing, it's changed a lot. So just give us a little trip through your writing and publishing history, where things are now and what you see for books.
Oh, this is actually the most difficult question you've asked me so far. I have very mixed feelings about what's going on. Years ago, people had a one publisher, and they nurtured you, and they wanted, you would repeat writing books for them. And now, and books would remain in print a very long time. And now this has pretty much changed. The books that are very powerful or very powerful sellers are usually by celebrities, and they have a lot of publicity people, and these are the books that people seem to buy more. And there are a lot of high quality books that are very difficult for people to publish. And I've been kind of lucky because I've had a relationship with one publisher, which is Inner Traditions, and they published the book the most recent book, and about 5 of my other books. And they keep them in print a long time. They seem to be open to authors who are not agented. A lot of books will only look at your proposal, a book proposal, if you have an agent. They don't. And I really was going to publish this book by myself. Many authors do self-publishing. It's not for everyone, but I published some of my books by myself. I wrote a book about Taiwan that nobody wanted to touch, and I was able to publish it myself. And this one was going to be published as well, self-published. And then a number of people say, oh, this has some commercial value. So I decided to send it to Inner Traditions on a lark, and they liked it immediately and published it. It's more difficult than before. We've talked about this. It's not easy. But self-publishing is one of the options, and also there are many small publishers that are opening uh, that are, may publish a book that we write, but it's a difficult process. Maybe you have something to add to that.
Well, I'm so grateful that we got to be authors. And I think anybody listening who's written a book or written several books can say, thank you, God, thank you, powers that be, that I got to do this. Because to be able to express in that way is just, to me, it's a beautiful, sacred gift. So I'm not sure where it's going. I know the Authors Guild is doing some kind of a program called Human Written, and you can get a seal that says that your book is guaranteed written by a human.
Oh,
I mean, whoever thought it would come to that? But it has. So I guess we can just watch it and see. And books are still being written and still being published, and we're still in on that. So that is fabulous. You know, both of us, I guess, trying to catch up with Geoffrey Hodson. Not sure we're going to quite do that. Nathaniel, bless your heart. Thank you so much. Everybody listening, you can find out more about Nathaniel and all of his amazing books in our show notes. We'll put that in the show notes section on mainstreetvegan.com, where you can just click on blog, find the info about Nathaniel, and also at mainstreetvegan.com. That is where we talk about the Main Street Vegan Academy program. We are going to be doing our 39th cohort this fall. This is where we train vegan lifestyle coaches and educators who go out into the world and do amazing things. Sometimes it's writing books, and sometimes it's being an influencer online. So we take all generations and all interests in making the world a kinder and gentler place. Nathaniel, I love you to pieces. And everybody listening, even those of you that I have never met, love you quite a bit too. So let us now go out and make Main Street vegan.